What would a society of salmon look like if they had a leisure society like ours? Every breeding season their instincts would tell them to swim upriver, avoid bears, breed, then rot away and die. I'm sure many salmon would find this instinct of theirs troubling. They are driven to destroy themselves, and while this is good for the species, it is not good for the pleasure of the individual. Many salmon would rather smoke weed, go to burning fish, see the world, and generally enjoy themselves rather than do something so laborious, unpleasant, and ultimately deadly. It is an unfortunate truth that in nature the survival of the species often requires its individuals to do things that are unpleasant and destructive, but at the same time we are driven to do them. The salmon that shirks his duty to swim upstream will always be driven to do it. The instinct is much stronger than conscious thought. Even if he completely eradicates the will to swim upstream from his conscious mind, the thought will only lay writhing in his unconscious mind, gnawing away at him until he addresses it. Pause this video and take one moment to reflect on your own desires. Are any of them destructive to yourself or others? Do you like to harm others? Do you crave drugs and alcohol to unhealthy excess? Even noble passions, like that to build a family or empire, require suffering, hard work, and destruction. Do you embrace or reject these desires? The chapter begins with Miss Miller seeing a moth flying against a light in her train carriage. This image brings forth strong feelings in her, and she identifies with the moth. She writes a poem. I longed for thee when I first crawled to consciousness. My dreams were all of thee when in chrysalis I lay. Oft myriads of my kind beat out their lives against some feeble spark once caught from thee. And 1 hour more, and my poor life is gone. Yet my last effort, as my first desire, shall be but to approach thy glory, then, having gained one raptured glance, I'll die content. For I, the source of beauty, warmth, and life, have in his perfect splendor once beheld. The moth is a creature with an extremely short life, and also a tragic one. The moth longs for light, but natural lights are out of its reach. The sun, the moon, and the stars are too far for a moth to fly to. And the lights here on Earth? Flames and filament light bulbs would burn the moth if it ever reached to them. A moth longs for things it couldn't possibly get, and even if it could, they would destroy the moth. Jung describes the proper course of passion as sailing between the desire of Scylla and the asceticism of Charybdis. I have just briefly described Scylla, so what about asceticism? Asceticism is the rejection of all desires. Jung describes early Christians who would seclude themselves in the desert and deny themselves all earthly pleasures, such as sex, drinking, and meat. Jung says that asceticism is forced sublimation and is always to be found where the animal impulses are so strong they must be violently exterminated. This quote makes me think of no nut, no fat meme culture online. There are people who claim there are benefits from never nutting and maintain that men should keep their discharges to a minimum. I have also begun to see many memes about rejecting lustful eyes and choosing other things over beautiful women. The word simp comes to mind as a weapon of this culture. These modern ascetics are a reaction to life in a culture that is over-bombarded with sexual imagery. Porn is free and easily available, women are incentivized to show as much of their body as they can on social media, and women today are clad more scantily than women from any other age since very primitive times. It is the overabundance of the feminine form that is causing some men to embrace the ascetic ideal. Miller reflects on her poem and relates it to a philosophical text she read. The same passionate longing of the moth for the star, of man for God. In her previous poem, The Morning Star, Miller longed for the light of God, but Jung revealed this to be mere horniness. Being horny for God is quite common. Jung references Mechthild of Magdeburg's flowing light of the Godhead as proof of this fact. But what comes to my mind is Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Miss Rand is a noted atheist, but psychologically, capitalism is her God. It is a representation of the libido, the striving for wealth, power, and new creations, and in her book people are punished with hardship and famine for ignoring it. If you have read Atlas Shrugged, it is clear that she is extremely horny for capitalism. In the beginning of the book, Dagny Taggart, a railroad company executive and author stand-in, completes a project with a steel manufacturer, which Rand specifies takes 9 months. It is clear that these deals between industrialists are sublimations of sex, and that the project itself represents a child. Why are sexual desire and longing for God so easily conflated? Jung finds mixing these two things, the loftiest conception of humanity and handsome men, to be in bad taste. Despite this, he understands the connection and explains it thusly. It is an error for one to judge the longing according to the quality of the object. The appetite of the gourmand, which is only satisfied with goose liver and quail, is no more distinguished than the appetite of the laboring man for corned beef and cabbage. We've all been there. It's 2 a.m., you're high or drunk with all your buddies, and you drive somewhere to get food. In that moment, Taco Bell would be just as pleasurable and satisfying, if not more so, than filet mignon. It is the same with the erotic and the divine. This is because the psychological mechanism of desire, the libido, is the same for God or coochie. It is the same force regardless if it's directed to one or the other. As we can see, the object of desire is of little importance. It is the desire itself that gives beauty and meaning to things. When Miller writes poems praising God, light, or Italian officers, she is praising her own overflowing love and desire, not the objects. This fact is what makes praising God or gods an especially direct phenomena, because while other objects like handsome men exist in the external objective world, God exists only in our internal psychological world. Jung believes that God is a representation of our libido. This is very apparent with Greek and pagan gods, who all represent some specific passion: Aphrodite with love, Ares with war and rage, Dionysus with parties and merrymaking. But the Abrahamic God represents the core aspects of the libido or desire. Therefore, praising God is a more direct way of praising our own libido. This praise of our own desire seems weird, but it's a reinforcement of our own life force. As Jung says, bearing a God within oneself signifies a great deal. It's a guarantee of happiness, of power, indeed, even of omnipotence. A friend of mine had a sister who believed she had a personal God within her. My friend thought this was perfectly ridiculous. When things went well for her, she praised her God. But of course bad things happen to us all, so when bad things happened to her, he felt this disproved that a personal God watched over her. She had cancer, and when she went into remission she thanked her God, but later on she died of cancer. My friend in his grief made the melancholic remark that her God didn't help her then. He couldn't make sense of it. He couldn't understand why she had believed that. In this book, Jung talks about a ritual that I think explains her belief in a personal deity. Ancient mystics would perform a ritual to achieve unity with God, to become God. They would chant the following: I am the God Atum, I who alone was. I am the God Ra, at his first splendor. I am the great God, self-created, God of gods, to whom no other God compares. The incantation continues, and Jung makes the following remark about the ritual. The identification with God necessarily has, as a result, the enhancing of the meaning and power of the individual. That seems, first of all, to have been really its purpose, a strengthening of the individual against his all too great weakness and insecurity in real life. This great megalomania thus has a genuinely pitiable background. So we can now see, my friend's sister having her own God within her gave her a sense of importance and power. The world is so big and uncaring. There are billions of people on this planet who are all just as unique and significant as we are. When we die, our name will be forgotten in a couple generations. These facts can cause some people to doubt the value of their own lives. But a God who looks after you and you alone tells you that you are significant. Your life has meaning and value. As I have stated earlier, God is a form of the libido. The strong personal connection to God is found by directing our desires and passions onto the internal world of our mind, rather than the external world of physical reality. This is known as introversion, or in psychoanalytic terms, the libido turned towards itself. The mechanics of introversion is what makes prayer and meditation effective. When mystics search for God, they isolate themselves and deprive themselves of external stimuli. This allows them to focus the libido completely into themselves. So when these God searchers put all their attention into their own thoughts and memories, what are they finding? Jung says that the libido turned inward will start going through dormant thoughts and memories, and the two strongest objects in the mind are that of the mother and the father. They are unequaled and imperishable. The basis of psychoanalysis is that these objects are represented to us in symbols, and that these symbols are universal. As unique as each individual is, we all have the same basic physical brain structure and the same instincts from our evolutionary history. In religion, the regressive reanimation of the father and mother imago is organized into a system. Jung declares that the Father, God, Son, and Fire are mythological synonyms. The Son has particular significance in symbology. Just as a man comes into a woman to create a baby, just as seeds are put into a field to bring the harvest, the sun shoots its rays onto Earth's face to create life here. The sun has been an important religious symbol since the beginning of recorded history. Jung describes the sun as phallic, because like a penis, it brings life to what it touches. Jung expounds on solar symbolism in religion. It is widespread and eternally prevalent. In fact, pantheons will often get reduced to a solar god. The Egyptians had periods where Ra was the only real god. It is the same with the Roman Sol Invictus. Even Christ is often described with light and solar imagery. This leads Jung to state that libido images may properly be reduced to a very simple root, that is, just to libido and its fixed primitive qualities. This is why the sun often plays such a main role in religion. The fixed primitive quality of the libido is the desire of creation, to bring new things and new life into the world. Human beings are animal creatures. We still have instincts. Creating new life is the main purpose of life itself, hence the strong instincts and prevalent symbolism. Like fire, the libido and its primitive qualities are both very useful and quite dangerous. Animalistic desire can be the downfall of men who fall into it without any resistance to it. Jung points out how destructive the libido can be. Its danger comes in two forms. The first danger is that of our pursuit of desire. When we desire something greatly, we are willing to push aside morality and do what's necessary to obtain our object. The second danger is that of our creation. The libido not only desires to create, but to create something that is stronger, more powerful, and more well adapted. Dr. Frankenstein's monster is a prime example of the creation's destructive power. Concerning the first danger, lust and love are the most relatable dangerous forces. Many men have come to ruin lusting after a woman, and I'm sure anyone watching this video can recount a time when he made a fool of himself pursuing a woman. But I feel the best examples of the dangers of the libido aren't simple sexual troubles, but men who have sublimated their libido to grand effect. Gaius Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, and the Austrian painter are all men who sublimated the drives of their libido, and their new creation was an empire rather than a child. Anyone who knows the history of these men will know the destruction they brought. For better or for worse, they followed their unchained, unfettered libido, which led to the deaths of millions of people. Caesar in Avaricum, Napoleon in Moscow, and Hitler's entire Eastern campaign. These gamer moments are testimony to the cruelty and immorality wrought by those who give themselves up completely to the libido. Their pursuit of desire ended up being not only destructive to others, but destructive towards themselves as well. These men were staunchly opposed and brought down. Napoleon avoided an overtly violent death, but being forsaken on a miserable island can hardly be better than suicide, or dying surrounded by friends. The second danger comes from our creation surpassing us and overpowering us. Our offspring grow stronger as we grow weaker. As Jung puts it, to be fruitful means, indeed, to destroy oneself, because with the rise of the succeeding generation, the previous one has passed beyond its highest point. Thus, our descendants are our most dangerous enemies, whom we cannot overcome, for they outlive us, and, therefore, without fail, will take the power from our enfeebled hands. Think of the creation of robots and AI. Humanity has created these things that one day may surpass us in our capabilities. We may one day build machines that are stronger than us, faster than us, and smarter than us. They may then decide that we are a nuisance and exterminate us. We will then have been destroyed by our own creation. Like Dr. Frankenstein, our passion for creation may be the passion to build the scaffold we hang from. But of course, all men will die, regardless of having children, so destruction does not come from the next generation, but from the nature of life. Even so, it is the next generation that we pass the torch to, so we must cede power to our creations. So perhaps one may be tempted to not create. Then, although you must die, there will be no one to pass the torch to, and you can keep your power your whole life. This may be tempting, But rejection creation, therefore rejecting the libido, is really a rejection of life itself. Whoever renounces the chance to experience must stifle in himself the wish for it, and, therefore, commits a sort of self-murder. From this, the death fantasies which readily accompany the renunciation of the erotic wish are made clear. Miss Miller quotes one of Byron's poems in her reflection. Still, blessed be the Lord for what is past, for that which is, for all are his, from first to last. Time, space, eternity, life, death, the vast known and immeasurable unknown, he made and can unmake. And shall I, for a little gasp of breath, blaspheme and groan? No, let me die as I have lived in faith, nor quiver though the universe may quake. The poem is the moth accepting its fate. The moth yearns for light, for God, for the bringer of life, for eternity and immortality, but it cannot reach it. The poem rejects the erotic desire and therefore chooses death. The line, "No, let me die," gives that away. The passionate longing is clearly in vain, so the poet gives up and chooses death. The poem perfectly reflects the Scylla and Charybdis metaphor Jung made earlier in the chapter. The destructive Scylla of desire is ultimately in vain, for there is no achieving contentment. Desire itself is a force. Even if one gains the object of their desire, the force of desire will then point to something else. On the other hand, the overly rational Charybdis leads to despair, the renunciation of life. Miss Miller is struggling with the weight of her yearning. It is painful to long for something passionately and never be able to achieve it. She suffers like Tantalus, which is causing her to sink into the seductive embrace of life renunciation. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you share this video with your friends. I hope you leave your phone number in the comment section so that I can call you, and we'll fall madly in love. We'll leave everything behind and start a new life together. Just you and me and our passionate love for each other. Goodbye.